What was the worst day in the history of the world? I believe it came on a Saturday some 2 millennia ago. It was the Saturday after Jesus was tortured and died. When the political and religious leaders of Jesus' day captured and condemned him, his followers fled and hid. One of his best followers, Simon Peter, tried to see what was happening to Jesus, but denied any connection to him when questioned by another bystander. When Jesus was finally killed, every one of those who had believed he was the promised Messiah before his death lost their faith in him. When authorities grabbed hold of one of Jesus' young followers, the young man wiggled out of their grasp, leaving behind his clothes. Before Jesus' capture, his own family thought he'd gone off the deep end. The Saturday following Good Friday, you would be looking at a blank page if you tried to list who were counted as Jesus' followers. Many of Jesus' former followers would have identified with Cleopas after seeing Jesus die. Cleopas was headed to Emmaus from Jerusalem that following Sunday with some friends. They looked somewhat dejected. When a stranger came up to the group and asked why the long faces, Cleopas explained their disillusionment. Their leader had died shamefully. He was the one they had hoped would set Israel free. Jesus was one among a number of others who claimed to be Israel's Messiah, or anointed one, who would rescue Israel from their captivity under foreign power since the time of King David. But every one of them had failed to retain any followers after their deaths. Luke told of other aspiring messiahs when he told of Peter and John before the Sanhedrin. A Pharisee, Gamaliel, spoke in defense of these followers of Jesus. He said, "Some time ago Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed. All his followers were dispersed. It all came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go, for if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail." That's found in Acts 5:36-38. Gamaliel was talking about a revolt in 6 AD in which Judas the Galilean played the role of a Messiah and failed, as did a revolt in 4 AD under a man named Theudas. Later, another Theudas in 44 AD tried to claim he was Messiah and was killed by authorities. A century later, 132 AD, another man, Bar Kokhba, claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. He headed a rebellion against the Roman government, but by 135 was overthrown and executed. The government then forced all Jews to leave Jerusalem. Bar Kokhba left behind no following. None of these messiahs ever had a following after they were executed. Once their leader was killed, the followers dispersed and gave up on their Messiah. Yet among these and many others, Jesus, after being executed, had a small band of devoted followers, and the band grew into a multitude and then into thousands upon thousands and continues today. Why? Why do millions today claim to be followers of Jesus, the Messiah, and not Bar Kokhba or one of the number of others? Let's look at 2 disappointed and despondent former followers of Jesus and see what happened to them. Saturday, they were among the doubters, but Sunday morning would be an eye-opener. That Sunday morning, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to the village of Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they were talking and thinking about what had happened, Jesus came near and started walking along beside them, but they didn't know who he was. Jesus asked them, "What were you talking about as you walked along?" The 2 stood there looking sad and gloomy, and then one named Cleopas asked Jesus, "Are you the only person from Jerusalem who didn't know what was happening there these last few days?" "What do you mean?" Jesus asked. They answered, those things that happened to Jesus from Nazareth. By what he did and said, he showed that he was a powerful prophet who pleased God and all the people. Then the chief priests and our leaders had him arrested and sentenced him to die on the cross. We had hoped that he would be the one to set Israel free, but it's already been 3 days since all that happened. They went on to tell Jesus about early reports from women saying Jesus' body was missing, but that didn't cut it for them. Later, Jesus challenged these two disciples. Why can't you understand? How can you be so slow to believe all that the prophets said? Didn't you know that the Messiah would have to suffer before he was given his glory? Jesus then explained everything written about himself in the scriptures, beginning with the law of Moses and the books of the prophets. When the two of them came near the village where they were going, Jesus seemed to be going further, but they begged him, "Stay with us. It's already late and the sun's going down." So Jesus went into the house to stay with them. After Jesus sat down to eat, he took some bread and he blessed it and broke it. Then he gave it to them. At once they knew who he was, but he disappeared. They said to each other, "When he talked with us along the road and explained the scriptures to us, didn't he warm our hearts?" So they got right up and returned to Jerusalem. The two disciples found the 11 apostles and the others gathered together, and they learned from the group that the Lord was really alive and had appeared to Peter. Then the disciples from Emmaus told what happened on the road and how they knew he was the Lord when he broke the bread. This happened the day after the darkest day ever for the followers of Jesus. When Jesus was crucified and publicly humiliated before dying on Friday, you couldn't find one standing disciple on Saturday who thought Jesus was the promised Messiah. The first glimmer of hope came early Sunday from those women who found an empty tomb. Their story of angels and all that held no water in the male-dominated Middle East of the day, but one of Jesus' disciples, Simon Peter, at least wanted to investigate and substantiated the women's story. But the word hadn't yet spread. For all practical purposes, Jesus may have been a great man, maybe even a prophet, but definitely not the Messiah. Into that situation stepped these two. Speculation abounds on who accompanied Cleopas, who himself is never mentioned again in the New Testament. Whether it was Cleopas' wife or Luke or someone else makes no difference. This account clearly ties the entire Old Testament to Jesus and his role as Messiah. When Jesus explained how Scripture spoke of him, it left a deep impression on the two travelers, began to open their eyes to the true role of the Messiah. It changed their understanding of how Jesus' ugly death fit in. But that was not all. When they suddenly recognized Jesus while dining, it nailed it. They left for Jerusalem holding on to a new paradigm, a radically altered view. Salvation centered on Jesus the Christ, who now lived in his eternal physical body, or transphysical, according to N.T. Wright. So it was that the actual physical presence of Jesus himself that changed Cleopas back into a Christ follower, and so it did for the others, including Jesus' own family. All Scripture now pointed one direction. Jesus' life, teaching, healing, his death for others, his resurrection, was proof of that it was all true. This filled their lives. These two disciples could not hold back their enthusiasm when they met Peter and the others. They were two among a quickly growing group of true Christians that eventually spilled over into other countries and into the whole world.